2024 has certainly been a great year for horror movies, with the likes of The Substance, Late Night with the Devil, Longlegs, Oddity, and I Saw the TV Glow taking some wildly creative swings that largely paid off. But not all horrors are created equal, and with the sheer number of horror movies being produced every year, they can't all be home runs. Failures and disappointments are simply inevitable. And that's unfortunately the case with the following films from the past year or so, which despite their promising concepts, great casts, and sure filmmaking pedigree behind the camera, fell far short of expectations. I'm Ellie for What Culture, and here are 10 hugely disappointing recent horror movies. Number 10, Trap. Even accepting that M. Night Shyamalan is far from a consistent filmmaker, he certainly has a knack for coming up with intriguing concepts and roping in talented casts for good measure. His most recent film Trap is certainly no exception, revolving around serial killer Cooper, aka The Butcher, who must attempt to free himself from a sting operation, a trap even, laid for him at a pop concert he's attending with his daughter. It's an assuredly delicious setup for a fun single-location horror thriller, and though Trap's first act sets things in motion ably enough, by the midway point it's clear that Shyamalan doesn't have anywhere compelling to take the story. There are a few obvious missteps here. For starters, ditching the concert setting halfway through the movie undermines the claustrophobic suspense established in that first half. But worse than that, the script is jam-packed with groan-worthy contrivances too. The result is a painfully underwhelming mishandling of a fantastic idea, enough that you might even wish another filmmaker offers up their own riff on the concept sometime down the line. Number 9, Apartment 7A. Though there were few horror fans in the market for a prequel to Roman Polanski's all-time horror Rosemary's Baby, interest was somewhat piqued by the involvement of both star Julia Garner and filmmaker Natalie Erica James, who made serious waves with their stellar 2020 debut Relic. Despite this promising pedigree though, it's clear why Paramount sent Apartment 7A directly to its streaming service and forewent a theatrical release entirely. Though touting solid performances and some striking imagery, the aggressively beige, boring script offers up precious little new while cribbing too eagerly from its inspiration. This is basically what happens when a studio desperate for content combs through its back catalogue and decides to spin a one-off story into an honest-to-God IP in its own right. Nobody asked for this, and while the personnel suggested Apartment 7A could surprise amid middling expectations, it somehow still failed to deliver even a basically effective companion to the 1968 film. Number 8, Maxxxine. Ty West's much-anticipated conclusion to his X trilogy, preceded by X and X's prequel Pearl, was by no means a terrible ending to the trio of genre-nodding slasher flicks, but it did fall far short of the benchmark set by its predecessors. As gorgeously grimy and uncompromisingly gory as it might be, Maxxxine is also a shallow giallo homage to a fault, to the extent that it actively weakens Maxxine's arc across the three movies. Anyone hoping for another surprisingly rich character study following Pearl will likely be disappointed by Maxxine's bizarre lack of interest in its title character, enough that even the great Mia Goth can only bring so much life to it. The film wears its clunky, predictable climax around its neck like an albatross, cementing that for all of this unexpected trilogy's ambition, it wrapped up in a manner unbefitting its two prior entries. Number 7, The Front Room. A24 have basically cornered the market on extremely well-made, well-acted, and psychologically driven horror movies. Just don't call them elevated. The studio's hit rate is incredibly high in the genre, and so expectations were naturally high for The Front Room, the debut of filmmakers Max and Sam Eggers, the brothers of fetish genre director Robert Eggers. In a surprising return to the horror realm, Brandy stars as a pregnant woman who, along with her husband, takes care of her ailing, abusive mother-in-law in exchange for a princely inheritance when she inevitably dies. It's a dishy premise for a horror flick with plenty of talent in front of and behind the camera, most of all acting veteran Kathryn Hunter, who in the very least takes every errant opportunity here to devour the scenery. But outside of Hunter's go-for-broke performance, this is a surprisingly mouldy yarn that lacks well-drawn characters or much suspense at all. And even when you laugh, you'll likely be questioning just how much of the humour is actually intentional. Number 6, VHS Beyond. The latest latest entry into the now annual VHS horror anthology franchise certainly wasn't bad, but nevertheless seemed to confirm that the series is content to put out a half-dozen middle-of-the-road shorts per year and call it a day. Since VHS made its return with the arguably franchise best VHS 94, it's fallen far short of recapturing the same giddy high, with VHS Beyond simply being the latest watchable yet forgettable installment. Several shorts here are certainly potential-rich and have their moments, but as is depressingly commonplace for the series nowadays, most of the stories could desperately use some trimming ahead of their punchline. Given the talent working behind the camera, including Justin Long, Kate Siegel, and Mike Flanagan, it's a shame that there's not even a single truly great short on offer here. And it has the unfortunate distinction of offering up perhaps the worst wraparound story of any VHS film to date. While VHS 8 is already confirmed to release next year, the series continues to feel strangely underwhelming despite the obvious passion that's put into each anthology. Number 5. The Watchers. From one Shyamalan to another now with the directorial debut of M. Night Shyamalan's daughter, Ishana Knight. Debates about Nepo babies aside, it was certainly interesting to see how far the apple would fall from the cinematic tree, especially with The Watchers touting a rock-solid premise and a strong cast. Dakota Fanning stars as Mina, an American woman who ends up trapped in a forest in Ireland, where she and 3 strangers are preyed upon by mysterious creatures. Yet despite its decent atmosphere and capable performances, The Watchers is a fundamentally boring piece of work. Packed to the gills with ropey exposition and failing to build to a satisfying climax, both Shyamalan family traditions, it would seem, this is a hugely disappointing squandering of an appealing concept. Number 4. It's a Wonderful Knife. If there were an annual award for the worst movie with the best title, it would probably go to It's a Wonderful Knife, a holiday-themed slasher flick released late last year, which was almost certainly greenlit on the basis of its name alone. Yet, while this gory riff on It's a Wonderful Life had potential out the wazoo, focused on a young woman who discovers the horrors which would transpire if she wasn't ever born, it's bogged down at all turns by illogical writing, convoluted reveals, and a distinct lack of seasonal charm. Jane Widdop and Jess McLeod make for an appealing duo, but director Tyler McIntyre brutally wastes an overqualified supporting cast, including Joel McHale, Justin Long, and Catherine Isabelle, on a story that's just not clever, funny, scary, or violent enough to satisfy as a Yuletide slasher. Much like Trap, someone should probably take another crack at this in a decade or two, even if only to recycle that glorious title. Number 3. Afraid. Though Blumhouse is in many respects the antithesis of A24 on the quality front, they do put out bangers every now and then, and Afraid definitely seemed like it might have had the sauce on paper. For starters, it's a horror film about the perils of AI starring the great John Cho and Catherine Waterston, a duo who certainly seem above the lowest common denominator slop Blumhouse puts out every few years. The future of AI is obviously a huge talking point right now, and so the topicality of a horror film centered around artificial intelligence run amok speaks for itself. Plus, with Chris Weitz serving as writer-director, it sure didn't seem like a listless hack-for-hire project. But anyone hoping for another Megan was sure to be left bitterly disappointed, with Afraid's lackluster script ironically feeling AI-produced. With an 84-minute runtime, it's painfully obvious that the end result was torn to ribbons in the editing room in an attempt to save it, but alas, 'twas to no avail. Number 2. Time Cut. Though it was widely accused of ripping off last year's time travel slasher Totally Killer, Time Cut was actually shot almost an entire year before Totally Killer. And so there was the genuine hope from horror fans that Time Cut would offer up another worthy spin on a similar idea, especially with its focus on now fashionable nostalgia for early 2000s culture. But despite some inspired production design and solid lead performances from Madison Bailey and Antonia Gentry, Time Cut is a colossal letdown. First and foremost, as a timey-wimey whodunit, it's bafflingly bereft of suspense, leading to a woefully dissatisfying third act reveal. As a slasher, meanwhile, this commits to the unforgivable sin of being almost totally bloodless, ensuring there aren't even some fun, goopy kills to savor amid the less than stellar writing. All in all, Time Cut fails to sustain attention for even its seemingly breezy 92 minutes, ensuring that Totally Killer holds the crown where time-traveling slashers are concerned. Number 1. Night Swim. As original horror movie ideas go, a killer swimming pool is pretty damn neat. Sure, it's silly as hell, but with the right knowing, self-aware approach, Night Swim could have been a B-movie blast. But even with the original shorts director Bryce McGuire back to helm the feature, and the killer 1-2 acting punch of Wyatt Russell and Kerry Condon, this is ultimately a maddeningly humorless, self-serious rendition of a fundamentally daft central idea. Despite solid production values and predictably sturdy work from Russell and and Condon, this is head-scratching dull fare, offering up little in the way of memorable kills and a frustratingly low on-screen body count. If you're making a movie about a haunted swimming pool that grants wishes in exchange for human lives, why not have some gosh darn fun with it? Night Swim seems completely allergic to this possibility, and the result is one of the most oddly tedious horrors of the year. It didn't have to be this way.